Thank you for being here, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to address you tonight. I'd like to begin with a poem I wrote. I call it Ode to John Lennon. I am a golden glowing, holy grail overflowing, with pink, yellow, and blue rainbows, to warm the hearts and smile the souls of all creatures, great and small. We are one and all, the walrus. So for those who know John. Okay. Ecology, like the word economics, comes from the Greek word oikos, meaning home. In archaic and classical Greece, women took care of the home, so the word oikos has a matriarchal female association. This is appropriate now that our sacred and beautiful Mother Earth has, for the last 2 centuries, been so raped, pillaged, plundered, and poisoned that it is necessary for an international environmental movement to come to the rescue. Such rescue, to the extent that it is currently even possible, requires the enlightenment of citizens, governments, and corporations, and the radical transformation of the institutions of culture. A culture which history texts and teachers mistakenly call civilization. There is nothing civil about Apocalypse Now, which Arthurian legends call the Wasteland. Parsifal, who starts out as a fool, an untutored child of nature, enters King Arthur's court, slays the red-armored warrior who insulted Queen Guinevere, then leaves the court to be tutored by a noble soul who teaches Parsifal how to be an authentic knight and gentleman. After much success and fame, Parsifal fails in his first encounter with the wounded Fisher King. He then wanders 5 years in the forest in what C. Ji Young calls the Nekia, the night's sea journey of despair. Prospero in Shakespeare's The Tempest, equally applicable to a thirst-starved sojourn in the desert. Finally enlightened by a hermit monk deep in the forest, Parsifal does the impossible. He returns to the magic castle, heals the Fisher King, achieves the Grail quest, and transforms the wasteland back into green pastures, fruit and wheat-bearing fecundity, and honeyed delight. Joseph Campbell agrees with Jung. Humanity now faces its own industrial and ecological nekia. We could learn so much, heal the planet, change the institutions of culture, if only we would heed Ecclesiastes. It doth not profit a man to gain all the riches in the world, yet lose his soul. Alas, the Western world as a whole, along with democratic India and communist China, have embraced a capitalist model of economics which is nothing less than a tragic and global Faustian bargain. Like Faust, our corporate and governmental overlords have sold their souls for profit and power. As a result, we are now collectively, as you know, careening toward Jeremiah's biblical warning, ye shall reap the whirlwind. Recalling us to the continued importance of the Grail quest and Parsifal's healing nobility, T.S. Eliot, early in the 20th century, penned his most famous poem, The Wasteland. He rightly ends that poem with Shanti, 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 a Buddhist term meaning peace. Peace can only be achieved when humans are educated into the realization that we are, by nature and karmic necessity, on a philosophic journey. The journey from the love of wisdom to the wisdom of love. The environmental movement began in 1962 with Rachel Carson's update of Jeremiah's prophecy. Her profoundly urgent book, Silent Spring. Rachel Carson begins. There was once a town in the heart of America where all life seemed to live in harmony with its surroundings. Then a strange blight crept over the area, and everything began to change. There was a strange stillness. The few birds seen anywhere were moribund. They trembled violently and could not fly. It was a spring without voices. On a morning that had once throbbed with the dawn chorus of scores of bird song, there was now no sound. Only silence lay over the fields and woods and marsh. Unquote. By evoking the expanding wasteland, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring seeks to recall us to what Chogyam Trungpa calls the sanity we were born with. We have lost that sanity because we have been socialized and educated into ignorance. That is why I invented the verb to ignorate. Please use it. It identifies the sophistry perpetrated by the corporate, political, religious, and media elite to keep us dazed and confused. The corporate, political, religious, and media puppeteers manipulate language and images, sights, and sounds to keep ordinary citizens imprisoned in Plato's cave, now known as the Matrix. Working folk, rich, middle class, and poor, from the best and worst of our educational institutions, are bewildered by a blizzard of epistemological confetti. Sports, commercials, sitcoms, celebrities, sex scandals, game shows, fear-mongering pseudo-news. Thus do citizens from the bottom to the top of the economic ladder in America remain committed to a self-consuming consumerism, enraptured by what Erich Fromm calls chains of illusion. We must also use the term, like yin and yang, we must also use the term interbeing. The secret meaning of relativity theory is this: we are all related. We are brothers and sisters interconnected with and interdependent upon the animals, rivers, oceans, forests, and biosphere. To be is to interbe, as Pythagoras, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Jesus, Meister Eckhart, and Gandhi all taught, and as quantum physics has now shown beyond all reasonable doubt. To be is to interbe. It's not dualistic. It's not separation. There is no such thing. As science increasingly confirms the deepest insights of saints and sages throughout the ages, we collectively are obliged, collectively and individually, it starts with individuals, we are obliged to take off our blinders and learn to treat each other and the planet with compassion, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Immanuel Kant advised, both urging in the 18th century education for enlightenment, which I call a pedagogy of bliss. Indeed, Kant, echoing Socrates, Buddha, and Rousseau, defines enlightenment as, quote, enlightenment, quote, liberation from our own self-imposed immaturity. Enlightenment is very simple. It's just liberation from our own self-imposed immaturity, unquote Immanuel Kant. The environmental movement, also known as the Gaia Movement, from the Greek word Gaia, meaning earth as living being. The environmental movement seeks to enlighten citizens, governments, religious institutions, and the corporate elite, thereby liberating them from what Noam Chomsky calls rational lunacy. Norman Mailer calls elephantiastical conceits. Isn't that a great phrase? Elephantiastical conceits. We have moral midgets in Washington and on Wall Street, struck with delusions of grandeur. Elephantiastical conceits. And why one wit called, what one wit called, the American system of compulsory miseducation. That's how they get to be that way. No wonder Native Americans call white men crazy, or that Australian Aborigines call us mutants. Chief Seattle said, what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. But our founding fathers, like Columbus and his genocidal conquistadors, refused to listen. We, therefore, are faced now with what the Hopis call koyaanisqatsi, a time radically out of joint. The remedy, fortunately, is simple. Navajos call it hojro, walking in beauty, walking in wonder at and gratitude for nature's gifts. After all, Mother Earth is our one and only spaceship. Destroying it is neither rational nor sane. Clinging to obsolete, chauvinistic, competitive religious ideologies only seals our collective doom. Fall and redemption? Forget it. We are not born in original sin. We are born in original blessing. The three Semitic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all trace their origin back to Abraham, and all have lost their way, replaced the nature-centered clinging to dualisms, right? The three Semitic religions continue to cling to dualisms which, tragically, replace the nature-centered, creation-centered, holistic, compassionate, feminist vision of interbeing with separate, male chauvinist, competitive ideologies which went to bed with the bankers and plunged the world into what Hegel calls the slaughter bench of history. It doesn't have to be that way, and we can no longer afford to let it be that way. Of course, I generalize. There are and always have been groups of exceptions in each religion, every religion. Poets, mystics, artists, and communes engaged in the joyful and communitarian dance of universal brother-sisterhood. They constitute the historical foundation of the spirit of the 60s, which Jung himself termed the New Age. Hence that increasingly popular saying, more and more people are leaving the church and finding their way back to God. The courageous, committed, and enlightened ones find God not so much beyond the world as in the world and in each other and in all creatures and in Gaia, our mother. This is called panentheism, and it signifies the New Age spirituality which overlaps with and graces even the most atheistic eco-pioneer. Thanks to Rachel Carson and many others, the first Earth Day was celebrated on April 22, 1970. And despite the Reagan-Bush counter-revolution, progress has indeed been made, partly due, for example, to Vandana Shiva and the feminist eco-pioneers in India, and to Masspurg itself. Environmental awareness continues to blossom. President Jimmy Carter said in the late 1970s, quote, "The environmental crisis is the equivalent of World War III," unquote, President Jimmy Carter. President Carter set an example for America and the world by putting solar energy panels in the roof of the White House, providing incentives and tax breaks for families and businesses who engaged in ecological renovation, and by vastly increasing federal funding for recycling and for research and development of non-proliferating energy sources. Ronald Reagan, in his first month as president in early 1981, slashed environmental research by 83%, research for non-polluting, eco-sustaining fuels. He slashed that budget by 83% and removed the solar energy panels from the roof of the White House and stored them in the basement, which is where America's environmental policies have mostly been ever since. So, yes, we have, in a sense, wasted the last 30 years. There is, nevertheless, a spirited, courageous, poignant, urgent, and increasingly collective and potent revolution in consciousness occurring in the world today, and the environmental movement is leading the way. So good on you. Bravo. So let us not lose hope. Let us instead, as we said in the 60s, keep the faith, because that's the only hope there is. Allow me to end with a brief set of quotes. The first is by Matthew Fox from his book, Passion for Creation, The Earth-Honoring Spirituality of Meister Eckhart. Fox asserts, quote, "How readily we have been taking for granted healthy rainforests, proper ozone protection, the wellness of soil and waters and air, and the immune systems of our bodies and of Earth." Green activist Jonathan Porritt of England rightly speaks of the environmental crisis as being, in fact, a spiritual crisis. And scientist Peter Russell writes of how it is the spiritual aridity, the dry, barren, thirst-starved, desert-like quality of Western culture that must be addressed in the environmental era if the true genius of the human species is to shine in the world and not extinguish the world. Meister Eckhart's earth-based mysticism, his celebration of the equality of being among all creatures, asserting that all creatures are words of God, awakens us to the deep truth of animal liberation, which, like women's liberation, is in fact really men's liberation from their own dualistic, elitist, planet-destroying chauvinism. Eckhart speaks of our need to recover reverence for being. And you don't have to have any faith or religion or spirituality at all to revere Mother Earth and your brothers and sisters, right? Reverence, you know, that's, okay. All right. Okay, so Eckhart speaks of our need to recover reverence for being, all beings, right? And thus to work our way out of our ecological malaise, unquote. Buckminster Fuller said, quote, "There are no passengers on spaceship Earth. We are all members of the crew." H.G. Wells said, "History is now a race between education and catastrophe." And he said that 100 years ago. Allow me next to quote the 20th century's most prophetic poet. Here are the opening lines of T.S. Eliot's 1922, The Wasteland. "April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers." Note Eliot's ecologically inspirational verbs: breeding, mixing, stirring, feeding. Revel in his colorful lilacs. Note his warning that the land may all too soon be all too dead. Observe his call for memory, recollection of our roots. Heed Eliot's caution that humans have become all too forgetful. Remember that we all have the same desire for beauty. Celebrate Eliot's yin-yang revolving of the seasons with his words spring, winter, warm, snow. All of this in just the first two sentences. That's why it's so brilliant. And note how he ends gloriously. Feeding a little life with dried tubers. Who is the little life? Children, of course, and the child in us all, upon which the future depends. And now, allow me to share my new version of the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the planet and to all the people and creatures on her, one ecosystem, universally sacred, with nourishment and beauty for all. In conclusion, then, I remind you that Shakespeare said, "The time is out of joint." But Dylan also said, "The times, they are a-changin'." Thank you. Om Shanti.